Very good evening to you all and a very warm welcome to another interesting webinar under NHRDN and Upohan series Between the Lines. This is Sheetal Bansode, the Chapter Coordinator for National HRD Network Pune, and I am hosting today's webinar along with the support of my colleague Darpan Singh. We welcome you all today on behalf of the entire Pune chapter team. Our panelists will be happy to listen to your thoughts and answer your questions. So please share with us at time during the webinar using the question panel. I now hand over to Dr. Niraj Mankad to take the session forward.
Thank you so much, Sheetal, and the big boss behind Not Visible, Darpan, for hosting this session here. A very good evening to all of you who have joined in, and to the great panelists here along with me. And it's a great pleasure to come here virtually, where it now feels like many years ago we used to meet up at Pune University or elsewhere in order to have the between the lines that Advait and Eklavya and his team at Upohan are so gracious to start off. It's been a great collaboration with Upohan from the National HRD Network Pune chapter, and on behalf of President Anand Khot and Vice President Aman Rajabali and the entire team, once again a very warm welcome to Milind, Raghav and Aashita, who should be shortly joining us, and a big thank you to Advait and Eklavya and the entire team of Upohan. An excellent topic, and personally being an educator, very much interested in listening to what the two great analysts here and the one who will join in have to say. So without much ado, giving it over to Advait and Eklavya, and especially wanting to hear the great summary by Eklavya, like you do to the books that during the between the lines. I would certainly want to hear what you would do to the NAP. So once again, a very warm welcome to each one of you, and over to you, Eklavya and Advait.
Great. Thanks, Niraj. Thanks, Sheetal. And just when we're finishing, you can see Aashita also joining. So that's great. So good evening and welcome to all of you. My name is Advait Kurlekar. Me and my colleague here, Eklavya, represent management consultants. We are a management consulting company based in Pune. And we have been organizing this program called Between the Lines for over 3 years now. Let me quickly take you through the format of what this program is. So every month we identify a book that we believe is a good book to read, is relevant, is topical, and has great insights and learnings. And depending on what the book is, what the insights are, what the topic is, we've been fortunate to always have a great panel of people, industry people, veterans from the respective fields, and I conduct the panel discussion. So Eklavya typically takes us through a summary of that book, which is without reading the book, one knows what the book is about, what we just mentioned. And then I will formally introduce our panelists today, and we will go on with the panel discussion. So about 25 to 30 minutes for Eklavya, 1 hour for the panel discussion is what that program is. Last over nearly 2 years, we've been fortunate to have the support of National HRD Network for these programs. So once again, thanks NHRDN for supporting us continuously. This, I believe, is our 43rd event, which means we've been doing this for so many months now, and that's what this is. So I hope you enjoy this program. If you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box, and somebody will help me identify what questions to ask somewhere during the panel discussion. So without much taking any of the time, I would invite my colleague Eklavya to join in and take us through the summary of Shankkar Aiyar's book, The Gated Kingdom. Meanwhile, he seems to have... Yeah, okay. So over to you, Eklavya.
Thanks, Advait. Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Thank you all so much. And let's get started. So Shankkar Aiyar, a familiar face for some of us, hopefully. Shankkar Aiyar specializes in the interface of economics and politics, with 3 books to his credit now. So this is the 3rd book that we shall be reviewing, or we shall be summarizing today. It's the 3rd book that he has published. And as a political commentator, he comments on how politics impacts people, governance, and the economy. He's been a journalist for over three decades, and he has won multiple awards. And he's been at the helm of a national newspaper and a news weekly as well. So when Shankkar Aiyar writes or speaks something, the entire nation does sit up and take notice. And people of a certain age would probably remember his 1991 scoop on a bankrupt India pledging its gold reserves that made national headlines back in the day during that time. On to the book, The Gated Republic. So just to give you some context in terms of what the book is all about, and also in trying to understand why he had to come up with this book. So Shankkar first talks about a much cited 2009 essay by economist Lant Pritchett, I hope I've got the name right, Lant Pritchett, who argued that India is not a failed or a failing state, but rather it is a flailing state. So that's the demarcation or difference that he brought about in that seminal paper which came out in 2009 and was very, very hotly debated and discussed in Indian political and economic corners. So in Pritchett's words, he said that India is a nation state in which the head, that is the elite institutions at the national level, they remain sound and functional, but the head is no longer reliably connected via nerves to its own limbs. So basically, he equated us to some kind of a headless chicken flapping its wings around. And that is something which probably hits home quite true, especially in some of the recent public policy debacles and failures that we have witnessed over the last few years. Now, in his new book, The Gated Republic, Shankkar Aiyar takes this argument one step further and states that the failures of India's public sector to deliver on its most essential functions has created a massive gap, which the private sector has had no choice but to fill. Now, before we go any further, I must tell you that if you've read Aiyar's first book, Accidental India, then you will be forced to wonder whether this book is penned by the same author. So Accidental India was uplifting in a strange sort of way, and it was about India stumbling upon the right answers somehow. That book promised that in our own typical Indian way, we will dawdle and muddle our way to eventually find answers to the complex problems that plague our country. It's a fun read, basically, but you can't say the same about The Gated Republic. This book is an uncomfortable read. This book is not a light read in any form whatsoever. And I've been telling that to Advait the last few days that I've spent reading the book, that it's not something that you want to be reading when you're down with Corona and you're isolated to your room. You just want to get out there and get somebody to listen to you and change the way things are happening in the country. So there is no underlying optimism to be found between the pages of this particular book. It is very much an in-your-face account of the systematic failures of the state and how the state has abandoned its people with the blatant public policy failures, and we now are left with no other option but to find our own answers. This is a book where the stark reality is presented relentlessly, like when one reads about a patient with a head injury getting his healthy leg amputated. So that's what you're in store for. Now, a minimalist state is all very well, but what about providing basic services such as healthcare and education? It is highly ironic that in our nation, we have far more rights as a consumer than we do as a citizen. We can yell and scream at a service provider and take him to task until he provides better service, but we have no ability to do the same with our local government bodies. And that's the question which Shankkar Aiyar poses for us to reflect upon. Why is this so, and how did we arrive at this stage? Now, this book examines the basic 5 issues, the big 5 issues of water, healthcare, education, electricity, and law and order. And it showcases in gut-wrenching detail how the state has let us down on each of these counts. Each of these issues comes alive with enormous amounts of diverse information, very nuanced knowledge, well-researched statistics, and anecdotes written in such a compelling manner that anyone who cares about India is likely to get furious, upset, and sad as the sorry state of affairs is dissected brutally. You know, there is a recent phenomenon that Advait and I have been observing on social media platforms, especially on LinkedIn. It's something called a failure resume, wherein highly successful people are proudly flaunting their failure resumes in public. So this book, it actually reads something like a failure resume of India, the country. Now, before you start defending the country and start labeling the book and the author as an act of treason, or trying to very deftly cajole Mr. Shankkar Aiyar that he should now go and stay in the neighboring country, perhaps the real purpose of this book is actually a patriotic service to lay bare the facts in such a way that even the most optimistic among us will not be able to argue with the sordid realities of our public services. Let's take water, for instance. We'll start with that. He talks about Bundelkhand, one of the places where the summer temperatures go above 45 degrees Celsius and there is acute water scarcity. Over there, people are actually borrowing water and they must return it within something like 24 hours or 48 hours and at twice the borrowed quantity. This kind of a parallel water economy is right now present in our towns and villages. There's a place called Mawsynram in Meghalaya, which actually took over from Cherrapunji, I think, as the wettest place on earth. And yet, residents over there are forced to ration water in winter season. In major urban centers, municipal corporations are issuing building clearances without ensuring water supply. The sale of water tankers to housing societies, according to Shankkar Aiyar, is among the fastest growing businesses in India right now. And India has a new ministry for water, which is ironically enough named as Jal Shakti. That means water power. The ministry was asked last year how many rural homes have access to piped water. Now, just to lend you some context, rural India has nearly 179 million households. Only 33 million households, that is barely 18% of the rural homes, are actually getting piped water supply. To lend you further context, this translates into nearly 730 million people, more than twice the population of the United States of America, are living without access to piped water. So piped drinking water for all, it just continues to remain a pipe dream, even after 73 years of independence. And let's not kid ourselves. There is a full-blown water crisis which is looming large for the country right now. Chennai and Bangalore are already competing with Cape Town as being a global and like a very tech-savvy city, but soon to be waterless cities. And India ranks 13th among 17 extremely high water risk countries. And again, just to lend you context once again, with a population larger than all the other 16 countries put together. So that is the dreary state of water affairs. Healthcare is next on Shankkar's agenda, but clearly not on the government's agenda. He writes that 63% of the poor people residing in villages would prefer to be treated in private clinics despite being entitled to subsidized treatment at government hospitals. In fact, I was quite shocked to read that India's 6 lakh villages are making ends meet somehow, with only one health center for every 3 villages. And 20% of these required or requisite health centers have not even seen the light of day yet. The construction has not even begun. The natural and somewhat costly outcome of this deficit in healthcare spending is that Indians are spending as much as 64% of healthcare costs out of their own pockets. India not only does worse than its comparable set of BRICS peers in public healthcare spending, But it's also, tragically, it's quite worse off when compared to heavily indebted poor countries. And that is as per the World Bank data which Shankkar cites in the book. I'll anyway talk about education in a bit more detail later, but suffice to say that millions of children are coming out of schools lacking basic rudimentary skills. Now, when it comes to electricity, the situation is equally bleak, with homes and businesses haunted by power outages, despite the superfluous claims about surplus power generation. He writes in detail about the controversial Enron project in Maharashtra, which got India's private sector electricity generation off to a bad start, and about Punjab offering free electricity to farmers in 1997, which set off a very dangerous chain reaction, and the country is of course paying a big price for all of these right now, and may continue to do so for years to come. And if you talk about law and order, our country has more outsourced private security contractors than police personnel. In fact, we have the largest number of private security personnel in the world, and the number of police constables is way below the UN norms. 8 million private security people as compared to 2 million cops on the road. No wonder private security is the second largest employment sector in India. And just to make your blood boil a little more, in a police deprived state like India, for every VIP, there are 3 policemen for his or her security. The problem is that while it is true that the government has no business being in business or running commercial enterprises like airlines, but the moral obligations of government to provide basic amenities to taxpayers cannot get defined as business. The book highlights with abundant examples how private markets take over when the state fails to discharge these responsibilities. Shankkar asks whether the government must raise the following questions at each step of the way. Do we need to do this? Do we need to run this? And do we really need to own this? In case anyone is still wondering about what the title of the book means, it alludes to the fact that people are shifting from their dependence on the elected government to a more privatized system by investing in a pay and plug economy. Millions of Indians are desperately seceding from dependence on government for the most basic of services as soon as their incomes allow them. They are paying for services they have already been taxed for. Shankkar equates it to an exodus or mass departure towards gated solutions, each being a republic of its own. So it's a disinvestment from hope in the government's promises and adopting private alternatives in the wake of these glaring public policy failures. It is truly the secession of the successful, and India is morphing into a nation of omnipresent gated republics. People are repeatedly choosing the high costs of private services over the failure of public ones, despite a continuous and increased pump of taxpayers' money. And you know what happens when the elite begin to opt out? The voice of the poor gets even more suppressed and problems become more entrenched. The creation of a gated republic is on account of a harsh reality, which is there is too much of government and too little government or too little governance happening. Dwight Eisenhower once remarked that in governance, the urgent is never important and the important is never urgent. This can also be an accurate description of the state of public affairs in India. So how did we reach this juncture? Now, one of the more obvious reasons is funding. Yet poor allocations have not always been due to the lack of fund availability, but rather their misdirection. Another reason stated by Shankkar is the one-size-fits-all policy or program designs that may not fit local requirements. Yet another reason is the push for short-term outcomes or for optics, rather than having some sort of an investment in long-term community building. However, one of the biggest reasons that he cites is the lack of decentralization, which leads to incomplete accountability, or as he puts it, it's a divorce of accountability and authority. Shankkar makes a very profound statement that when it comes to public policies, the last mile of delivery is actually the first mile of governance. And if you think about it, that's probably where the chain gets broken in India. Because all other countries which rank high on delivery of these basic public services have done so by empowering the local governments. Drinking water, sanitation, health, education, rural electrification are all listed by our constitution as subjects under the jurisdiction of the local rural bodies for better accountability. However, in most of our states, barring a notable few, these functions continue to be under the tight control of the State Department for obvious reasons. And you know that the real issue is of accountability because Shankkar has used that word 32 times in the book. And again, for some of you who might be thinking that this book is probably an ode to privatization, singing the praises of privatization, that's not the case. He writes in a very balanced manner by praising private players who have performed well and also calling out crony capitalism, which is masquerading under the garb of privatization. So education is the topic of the day, and fortunately for us, Shankkar has also covered it in excruciating detail. The poorest of the poor are trying to send their children to private schools because the quality and access to public schools is abysmal. Shankkar's obsession for numbers paints a not so pretty picture. So he talks about how last year the HRD ministry declared that the number of students enrolled in government schools fell by 12.5 million in the preceding 4 years. That is more than the entire school student population of the United Kingdom. And during the same period, enrollment in private schools jumped up by 14 million. He writes about Narayan Murthy telling him how one day around 50 women who were part of housekeeping and maintenance in the Infi campus came to him with a request. They wanted him to get their children admission in English medium private schools. And they were willing to spend or part with a significant portion of their salaries on the fees. In essence, they were sacrificing their present for a better future for their children. Lack of teachers due to chronic absenteeism and vacant posts has been identified as the problem with public education, but neither the issue of absenteeism nor vacant posts gets addressed with over 11 lakh, if I get the number correct, over 11 lakh teacher posts are still lying vacant as recently as last year. More than 40% of schools don't have electricity or even a boundary wall. And instead of focusing on these pressing issues, our ministers would rather inflict more damage. This is something which I didn't know, but Shankkar writes that when the anti-copying law was passed, the pass percentage came down to 14% for the class 10 exams in 1992. Enter Mulayam Singh Yadav, who abolishes the anti-copying legislation, and the pass percentage went up to over 85%. Go figure. So NEP offers hope, but let's wait before calling it a game changer. In 1966, the National Education Commission suggested that India's expenditure on education should be increased to 6% of the GDP. More than half a century later, India continues to aspire to spend 6% of GDP on education. All the things that we are now reading about in the policy document about foundational literacy, vocational training, focus on research and higher education, all these points were already part of that 1966 Commission report as well. It just goes to show that intent has never been backed by action. Shankkar draws a very valid comparison when he states that India and Indonesia had similar literacy rates when this 1966 report was published. In 2020, Indonesia stands at 95% literacy rate, while we are still languishing at 75%. NEP promises change, but it is not clear in terms of how it will deliver all that it promises. The same way as we don't have sufficient teachers, even the Anganwadi centers, which form the crux of early education in NEP, they are also plagued with their own set of problems. They are severely understaffed. Most of them don't even have toilets or drinking water facilities. The state of affairs in education is truly just an imitation of the state of governance. Policies come with platitudes, implementation is nobody's business. Now, if you're looking for a prescriptive book or a bullet point presentation on solutions to fix this public services mess, you're not going to find it here. Shankkar does not have the answers, and frankly, he's already done more than his fair share of service by enlightening us with the problems that we face. It's up to us to demand answers from those who are in charge, and he's just prodding us to ask the right questions. In fact, we had reached out to Shankkar to join us today, but unfortunately, he's stuck in Toronto for quite some time, and the time difference did not permit him to be a part of today's discussion. However, he was kind enough to share a few thoughts with us regarding today's topic. And in particular, I've highlighted the last sentence that he's written. Democracy is not and cannot be a spectator event. I think this is as profound as anything that he's written in the book, and there cannot be a better way to end my presentation. Thank you all for listening. I urge you all to read this book. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our nation, to our society, we owe it to the future generation to at least be aware of the kind of problems that people encounter, but most of us just don't bother to do anything about it. My name is Eklavya Malhotra, and over to Advait for the main feature of today's session, the panel discussion.
Thanks, Eklavya. Thanks, as always, for the lovely presentation. Very interesting insights from not just education, but from different aspects that Shankkar has covered in the book. Great context for today's discussion on the NEP. So let me start by a formal introduction to our esteemed panelists today. So first and foremost, let me start with by welcoming Raghav Gupta. Raghav, welcome to the panel discussion. Welcome to Between the Lines. Raghav, as many of you know, is the managing director of Coursera for both India and APAC. He's a fellow consultant. He's been head of retail practice in what used to be Booz and Company and now Strategy and. He used to be president of Necropac Advisors. He was the country manager at BlaBlaCar. He's a NIFT and INSEAD alum. And of course, now, last couple of years, he's heading Coursera and at the forefront of using technology and edtech as far as education sector worldwide is concerned. His domain, of course, is India and APAC, and would be great to have him and share his views in terms of technology is and what's happening in the higher education sector. So thanks, Raghav, for joining in today, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Advait.
Next up is Professor Dr. Milind Sohoni. Milind is the Deputy Director at Indian School of Business. He's the professor of tenure professor, if I should add, of Operations Management at ISB. He's also overseeing, I believe, the Mohali campus for the ISB. He's a COAP and a PhD from in operations research from Georgia Institute of Technology. He's been, other than full-time in ISB, he's been a visiting faculty at Kellogg's and a visiting scholar in Stern School of Business in New York. He has written several papers in the education field, in the operations field. He's worked with Delta Technologies and Bell Labs before now, last 8-9 years now, back in India as the Deputy Director at ISB. So thanks, Milind, welcome, and look forward to your views in terms of the NEP. And last but not the least, please join me in welcoming Aashita Mehra. Aashita is a fellow classmate from SP Jain Institute of Management and Research. She spent more than 2 decades in the education field. She's a in her own right. Currently, she's on the board advisor of Oberoi International School, and she's also worked with, again, a fellow consultant like me and Raghav in PwC in the beginning part of her career. So welcome, Aashita, and thanks for spending your time between the lines here.
Thank you.
So what I would like to start, maybe Raghav, I'll start with you because you were the first one to sort of get introduced. Just as a quick kind of thing, as an easy warm-up kind of question for you, maybe. All of us have obviously read about the new education policy, what it means, etc., etc. So from your own perspective, how would you like to bring out maybe top 2 or 3 salient features from your own as far as the NEP goes, and more importantly from the specific domain that you cover in terms of edtech and technology in education? How is it likely to impact as we move forward?
Yeah, absolutely, Advait. And once again, thanks for inviting me today. I just want to ask this. The audio is a little unclear. I don't know if it's my internet or if it's yours, and if Milind and Aashita are seeing this as well. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
All right. All right.
No, Raghav, you're very clear, but I know what you meant. I think Advait was a little patchy in the middle. Yeah. So.
Okay, so it's possibly your internet then, Advait. And I also want to add a little bit of a disclaimer. I'm not a regulatory expert, so some of my comments on NEP will sound fairly not expert-like. But I would say I've had the opportunity to have a fairly close data-driven view of what matters from a career standpoint, what matters from a working world standpoint. Coursera has millions of people who are working professionals in India, in Asia, and around the world. And then over the last 1 year, I've had the opportunity to also serve millions of students who are in colleges and universities. And so I've had a bit of a point of view on what's happening with college education and higher education in general. So with that as disclaimers, firstly, I think the fact that to me personally, the NEP came out when it did. I was in an event at Wiki Higher Education in December where the author, the chief author had presented the NEP, and it had just been kind of released to the public at that point in time as something that's going to cabinet. The fact that it came out within 5-6 months was really good for me to see. And secondly, without getting into a lot of detail to get us started, I've looked at it as having 3 broad sections, which I think have been quite helpful for me to understand. The first is around the general, broader academic institutional reforms. So the fact that there's going to be lesser number of regulatory bodies, the fact that choice-based credit systems is going to go up, the fact that top institutions like IITs and IIMs will be encouraged to expand and so on. So those are one bucket of changes which have been proposed, which I think is really helpful to see. Second, I think the way the degrees and credentials have been reimagined, I think that is interesting, and very specifically AI for X, AI for healthcare, for example, or AI for something else, for example, or the fact that you have now 3 or 4 year opportunities and so on. I think that's interesting to explore as well. And then the third is online learning becoming more mainstream. I don't think it's a panacea. I don't think it's the only solution that we need in India, but in various forms, I think it has a big role to play. And I think that's the other piece, which I think is a highlight for me. So I'll stop with that.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. Great. Great. I'll come back to you on the technology part a little later. But moving on to Aashita, what's your take, especially from from the school education perspective? What would be your 2 or 3 key highlights that you have seen from this NEP?
So again, I'd like to start with a disclaimer. I worked mainly with, in private schools in urban settings. So that's my context. But of course, my perspective is not limited to that. I hope I'm clear.
Sure.
Am I clear? Okay. All right. So that would be, my disclaimer out there. But I've always, watched what is happening in, the school space. More than out of academic interest, but we do a lot of exciting things in international schools, in urban-centric elite schools, and then I see my colleagues at other private schools or some public schools trying to achieve so much more. So for me, the first reaction was that NEP is kind of nudging everybody in the same direction that, we are hoping, all schools take. It's, more than, I mean, the regulations are there. I, agree with Raghav. That's, one part of the NEP policy. But I think for me, what excited me the most was really extending the NEP to pre-primary education, including, children age 3 upwards, looking at it from, a K to 12 perspective, because even the RTE never considered that. So there was this whole section of, kids who were out of the ambit of any school regulation. So I think that's something that, excited me. Of course, I mean, there are, other things that we've always been talking about, like, for example, not having board exams as high stakes. This is something that we've, constantly been even educating parents about, but, not so much entry-level colleges and universities about. But for us, it's always been, a topic that has been close to a lot of educators' hearts. The fact that, kids have multiple intelligences, that's kind of been addressed in the NEP. Even in previous, education policies. I mean, like, something, as simple as multidisciplinary learning in schools. This should have always been a given. So I think that's also excited me. My real concern, and when we come to that, really is on, the language policy. So, I'll stop here.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I'll come back to that language part with you. Milind, coming on to you, this, it sort of stops at +3, +4, depending on, whether you want to do a 3-year or a 4-year. And what you do really comes as a postgraduate kind of thing. And that's where it talks in terms of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and cross-disciplinary kind of research universities and teaching universities kind of thing. So from a business school perspective, and arguably India's top business school perspective, what do you see as impact, or how would that impact your kind of education, this NEP? I know it takes some time, but what's your view on that?
Yeah, so first, thanks for having me on this panel, and great opportunity to at least talk about this. And just like my fellow panelists, the disclaimer that I am not a regulator, or I don't study policy, education policy, but it does impact particularly my life quite a bit, because I am in the profession of teaching itself, right? Now, having said that, so this policy, so let me answer that in two phases. One is about, it talks a lot about undergrad education and multidisciplinary, but the good thing that it focuses on is more autonomy to higher education institutes. And linking it back to the question that you had in mind was, institutions like ISB actually fit the bill that the policy act enshrines quite heavily, right? Because we are an autonomous institute. We have a governing board that is, gives the direction, but largely we are driven by academics, and we have complete academic governance itself, which is what the, policy pushes for. And the emphasis on research, teaching, and service, right, which is the life of a faculty member, particularly across the globe in most research and teaching universities. I mean, these are the three functions that faculty should focus on, and we are in line with that. Now, unfortunately, but just to pinpoint that, I think the big difference that was going to make for institutions like us is this multidisciplinary nature of education itself, because that seems to be the emphasis, whereas specialized entities and single focus institutions will have to morph and figure out how they can become multidisciplinary in order to get the benefit of living under the NEP itself, right? So I think that's the significant challenge institutions like ISB and standalone institutions are going to face.
Okay. Sure. But Milind, just to sort of continue with what 2 points you mentioned. One is, of course, about the multidisciplinary thing. The other one is about autonomy. Now, business schools per se, in any case, had moved away from marketing specialization or finance specialization to major and minor and that kind of thing. So in a way, they already had started doing this. So does it really seriously change going forward? And on the point of autonomy, is that good or is that bad from your own perspective and from a government's perspective? I know none of you represent the government.
So I personally believe that autonomy is good, particularly in the field of education, and I'll also make a comment about the way the Board of Governors. I mean, the policy does not give details, and what the earlier discussion on Aiyar's book, I think again is the problem with this policy too, because it just has excellent ideas, but implementation is lacking. Having said that. See, management as a field, whether you consider it multidisciplinary, because there are sub fields within like marketing, operations, finance, but you're thinking only management as a field, right? My understanding of multidisciplinary as the way they are mentioning it is the ability to bring in so for example, right, I mean, if I were to run a public policy school and a governance school along with data sciences and analytics, that would kind of make it a multidisciplinary approach to the field of management, right? So I think that's where my understanding from where after reading the NEP is.
Understood. Sure. Okay. Aashita, coming back to the point that you mentioned, one of the things you mentioned was language. Now, what is the issue with the language? Because if you read the text of the policy, they are saying that look, it's a regional language or mother tongue, and it's not compulsory. So why is this about language? And for an international school, like you, does it matter or you switch to, because there is no one language that you can teach English. So what's your take on that?
Okay, I think I lost you a little bit in the middle, but I kind of have figured out what your question is about. Yeah, I got that. Yeah. So I mean, to give you an example, our school is located in Mumbai, and a couple of months ago, the Maharashtra government came out with a policy that said that we have to teach. They always had a loose policy which said that you have to teach Marathi, in schools. They hadn't specified which grades, what kind of curriculum, and all they said was that all schools in Maharashtra, including state schools, ICSE, CBSE, IB, IGCSE, have to all teach Marathi. We were not able to really get any clarity. We were not able to decipher what that meant. This I'm talking about a couple of years ago. So some schools introduced it as once a week language class. Some did it as an after school club, and each one had their own interpretation of it. About 6 months ago, the state government said that you have to introduce Marathi in grades 1 and 6. And there's going to be a curriculum which is going to be prescribed by the government. We haven't still received it. So that obviously got us into staffing mode. We had to get a Marathi teacher. We have 2 campuses in Mumbai, so one for each, and you start in grades 1 and 6, and then you let it grow into the school. This is an example of how language policy is implemented. And I don't want to get into the politics of it and why they would stress on regional languages, but the first reading of it looked like you have to do away with English medium education up to grade 5. Of course, the policy itself is worded in such a way that wherever possible, schools should introduce that 3-language policy. A couple of days ago, it's already in the papers that Tamil Nadu has already decided they're not going to implement it. A couple of other states too. So I think sometimes it's just the ambiguity of these policies, and schools have to plan years in advance. So when even when you listen, to Eklavya's discussion on the book, and Raghav also rightly spoke about, the intent has already been there, or has always been there. But it's again we are coming to that implementation part. I would say that out of this whole NEP, I would pick smaller victories. I would go for the smaller gains which are going to have some massive, changes. And that's the reason why I said, early education excites me. The language policy doesn't, because introducing language policies means having, resources in other languages. Try to look for a math textbook in Odia or, in any other language in India, or a science textbook. They're extremely hard. If you're talking about digital resources, I mean, that's, we're a couple of years away from that. So that's really my, gripe with the language policy. I think it could have been, even not only worded differently, but it could have been even different in its intent. I understand, the reason to have that whole regional push. I think they've, taken examples of Germany, where it's compulsory to learn German till you're in grade 5. India is very different. I mean, look at the number of languages we have in our country. And frankly, as an educator, for me, language is more than a medium of instruction. The NEP talks a lot about, language being a medium of instruction. For me, it's a medium of communication. It's a medium by which, kids connect in a class. So I think really that's where the language policy, could have done a lot better.
Of this session now, looking at
Advait, unfortunately, we can't hear you.
Yeah, Advait,
I think we might have lost him.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, he's gone offline. Yeah, he is offline.
He's just coming back on. Just give us a minute.
okay.
Sure.
But in the meanwhile, Eklavya, I mean, your synopsis was very nice, and I think it's applicable to this policy too, in many ways. Yeah.
I was listening to him and thinking of all the points I wanted to make, and I realized that none of them hold good.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Okay, so in the meantime, we just continue with it. I think Advait is trying to log in. So he had one question for you, Milind, which was next up. So we were talking about public expenditure as a percentage of GDP, which needs to more than double now to 6% if we have to reach that ambitious target. Where should this expenditure be prioritized? Or rather, in which areas or aspects of education do you feel this should be prioritized?
Hard question, really hard question, because I think, India and the competing objectives just within education, right from, I mean, primary all the way till, higher education. So to me, I think, because I have been focusing more on the higher education sector itself, right? And I'm just trying to understand that. I think that outlay has to be significantly more. So how much of the 6%, that would be hard for me to say, but we really, really need to ramp up the quality of our graduates, all disciplines. I mean, there are these abysmal reports that you might have seen where, 80% of our engineering graduates are unemployable after they come out of, their undergrad education into the knowledge economy. And if the economy and if the world is transforming the way we think it is, right, given, what's happening in the space of artificial intelligence and, the new kind of work that we all will be doing, we are just not there. And more importantly, I think there has to be a much higher allocation towards creating research and innovation in universities, because it is, as a faculty and as a university, if I'm not in the business of knowledge creation, then I cannot stay ahead of the curve, right? And if you look at the numbers today, I mean, the policy itself talks about that only 0.69% of the GDP goes into research activities, which is far lesser than what most of the developed economies are, where we are seeing a significant amount of research getting in. So to me, this allocation has to be fair, right? Because all along what happens is, at the cost of one, you try to allocate the resource somewhere else, and you can't do that. You just have to figure out ways of getting in more resources even at the higher education level. Otherwise, this policy is largely aspirational, right? I mean, look at it. We have about 1,000 universities already, with about 40,000 colleges, and the number of PhDs is barely 40,000 coming out in this year. It's too little, right? I mean, and with that kind, we are neither generating faculty that can get back into the teaching profession, forget doing research, right? I mean, we are not even capable of generating that kind of faculty that will be doing, because the quality, of course, is something that is another question that we have to answer. So yeah, so that's my pitch, that the government has to figure out how does it create a larger innovation-based university system. We are not going to get anywhere without that. Yeah.
Okay, Raghav, that actually, like the point which Milind was also stressing on, I think this is something which we would like your views, that when we talk about lack of employability, at the same time, there is also lack of employment. So, students or graduates coming out of Indian colleges, they are struck with this double whammy right now. There is lack of employment, and there is, of course, the perennial issue of lack of employability. Now, this is some place where obviously platforms like Coursera are ideally poised to make a difference when it comes to making people more employable, giving them the skills which they're not getting otherwise in colleges and in universities. Now, do you feel that the NEP has factored it in, like, in any way? Or do you think, I mean, like, what's the role of technology going forward? How does it really push this process further ahead?
So I think there are two aspects to this. One, if you look at it from a short-term standpoint, we are going to see a massive jobs recession for the next 2 to 3, 4 years. And I think what we were already seeing, which is accelerated because of COVID, is technology is definitely changing jobs, right? And there are many, many reports, whether it is a McKinsey report or the World Economic Forum, which talk about how even in a country like India, not just in more developed countries, technology is significantly changing jobs, whether this be in the manufacturing sector or in the services sector. And I think the challenges that we've had are twofold, right? One is that the average graduate has not received quality education. So just the fundamentals that they need to come to work with, which is ability to work in a team, communication skills, critical thinking, functional skills, those are not there. But the second aspect is that if you are a commerce student, and I think 1/3 of Indian higher education is students studying BCom, another 1/3 is BA and BSc and so on. And if you're somebody who's just studying a BA, BCom, BSc, and you want to work in banking, and banking is becoming digital, banking is becoming, led by fintech, banking is becoming data led. These are topics that you've never been taught. So I think the challenge is twofold. One is, in the pre-COVID world, the general quality, how do we improve that? And the second challenge is, in a post-COVID world where technology and data have such a massive role to play and skills have changed very quickly, how do we kind of solve for that? So Coursera is the world's largest platform for higher education in terms of number of learners on our platform. And we do something called a Global Skills Index. So we take working professionals on our platform, and we look at what they are learning, what is the complexity of the kind of courses that they're taking. And we also look at how they're performing on the assessments that they're taking when they take a course on the Coursera platform. And this gives us a lot of data. So we benchmark as a part of this Global Skills Index. We benchmark 60 countries, and we benchmark 10 industries. And the industries which are the larger represented, industries on the Coursera platform. So technology and financial services and manufacturing and professional services and so on and so forth. And the reason I'm sharing this context is if you look at where India ranks out of 60 countries in skills like business, technology, and data science, the news is not the best. If you look at the performance across these three areas, India comes in, I think, number 35 on technology, on business skills. Sorry, number 34, I think, on business skills, number 40 on computer science skills, and number 51 on data science skills, when we compare it to the 60 countries on the Coursera platform. So I think the challenge does remain that, we need to take these 45,000 colleges, 1,000 universities, and up the general level of quality of instruction. And second, we also need to teach these new skills which COVID is bringing into the world. There's no way this can happen in a physical world. We just don't have the time, we don't have the land, we don't have the money, we don't have the faculty to be able to do this. And I think we have, at Coursera, we've launched a platform called Coursera for Campus, which has a fairly significant role to play, I think, in this overall challenge. Now, the intent of Coursera for Campus is to bring content from the world's top universities, from India's top universities, and also from the world's top companies, and make that available to students. So there is content from Stanford, there is content from ISB, there is also soon going to be content from IIT Roorkee, IIM Calcutta. And if we can bring that to a student in an average college, in an average university, to complement what they're learning on their campus, and make this available at a very, very low price, something like 1,000 rupees per year or 5,000 rupees per year per student, then I think there's an opportunity to improve both the general standard as well as the standard for the future of work. Over the last 6 months, we made this particular platform, Coursera for Campus, available for free to all colleges and universities around the world and in India. As of now, about 7 lakh students have been learning on the Coursera platform for free for the last 6 months, and they've taken millions of courses on the platform. And the feedback that we're getting is, education used to be such a pain point for most students. It used to be a chore. You did it because you had to get attendance. You did it because you had to perform exams. But most of the education that has happened in the last 6 months was optional, and students have enjoyed it. They've taken 5 courses, 10 courses, 20 courses across different institutions, because the joy of education has actually started to come through. And I'm using this data point, some of these data points, just as examples to illustrate that the pace at which we can make an impact is quite significant because of technology. It is clearly not a panacea. It's not going to solve all of our problems. We do need people to interact in the physical world. We do need people to work together as humans, and teamwork and all of that stuff, social skills and so on. But I think there is a significant role that technology also has to play in everything that's changing.
Sure. Sorry, I got dropped off.
I'd actually like to add to what Raghav said. I mean, if you look at the NEP and it talks about getting, 3.22 crore students, back into, the school system, and to double the gross enrollment figures by 2035. It spells that out specifically. It's aspirational, but even if you were to break it down into numbers, it would mean opening 1 new university, every week, and opening, 50 new schools every week. I mean, that's what, will take to serve the aspirations of the NEP. And the only thing that can really do it is technology. You would ask an earlier question to Milind about, where will the 6% GDP go? I think a lot of it, will go into building really school infrastructure in rural areas and semi-urban areas, just to keep kids in school. I mean, they talk about dropout numbers, and gender studies have said that many girls drop out of schools when they hit puberty, because they have no toilets to go to in school. So it's really where the spending will be. I mean, I agree with Milind that in the higher education, and post that it'll go into research, teacher training, development, But really at the grassroots level, it's just going to go into, building school infrastructure.
Sure.
So I agree. Aashita, I think that's a very important point. And in fact, when I worked with Teach for India, that was one of the biggest concerns. That how do you get kids, and particularly how do you get women, girls, keep them.
Yeah.
But to one point that was made earlier on the digital, right? I think one thing that the policy has completely missed, and this is more, I think, in the higher education space, this role of, once you get digital and once you start, disseminating in that mode, IPR issues are not clear, right? And I think this policy needs to develop some guidelines for that as to the dissemination of knowledge in a digital platform, right? And somehow that is not completely addressed over here. But I agree that, I mean, that's a way of at least, relieving the pressure. Otherwise, this is impossible to,
I mean, like a simple example, like you have to introduce coding grade 6 onwards.
Yeah.
I cannot, imagine the life. How would we train teachers to teach coding to all kids grade 6? And I mean, that's when we'll, possibly have to go to Raghav and say, now develop something for us. And I think it's important, like the education sector doesn't work in isolation.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're talking about,
I mean, one of the biggest things has been Khan Academy. I think, train the trainer. I mean, that has been an incredible thing that Khan Academy has been able to achieve, right? I mean, at the high school and, middle school levels. Incredible.
So, Aashita, there's a question from the audience that, you mentioned about coding and teachers and train the trainer was what Milind was saying. So are school curriculums already overloaded, and will this NEP lead to more of kind of thing, thanks to, we need to do this also, we need to do that, and especially focus moving to skills now? How do you cope as a school? I mean, you're of course, well endowed and, kind of international school, but we are talking of, government schools or smaller schools, rural areas like you talked about. How do they cope with this then?
So, there I would say that the NEP has made a positive step in terms of, that national curriculum framework. They are planning that PARAK, and I mean, there's so many abbreviations in the NEP. It's hard to keep track of them. But, there are a lot of positive steps. So I'm not, going to put them down at all in terms of, getting solutions to rural areas. Something that, a lot of people don't talk about is that the national curriculum framework is actually talking about bringing down content by 30%. So that's something that, should, so that really makes way for a lot of skill-based education. When they talk about, 10 bagless days and vocational education and, getting kids to try on like, internships. That's really where skills come in. This is the first time where they've spoken about having centralized report cards, like, telling schools what report cards should look like, and they should be, based on holistic, development. This is all music to an educator's ear. So if we have to teach coding, we will do so. If, like I said, we had to teach Marathi, we figure out a way to teach it. But it's not something that the education system can do in isolation. It will require support from government agencies, from private agencies, such as Raghav's. There'll be a whole lot of support that will be required. My worry always is having worked with even government education officials, is that none of them know anything about education. So when they come in and, sometimes they even give us tests to run in school, they have no idea. So it's not only about, training the teachers, it's not only about training school administrators, but it's about training government, administrators who look after this education space. So
training is required not just for teachers, for administrators.
A whole lot of training.
Okay. Raghav,
I do want to add one point, if I may, Advait. And this is just anecdotal. I was mentioning earlier that in the last 6 months, there have been about 7 lakh students who've been learning for free in the higher education space on Coursera. The number one course that these students have taken out of the 4,000 courses on the Coursera platform is called Programming for Everybody in Python from University of Michigan. And I've met the professor who teaches this course, Dr. Charles Severance, and he's an amazingly engaging faculty member. He makes it a fun learning experience. And the reason I'm sharing this is, given people a choice where nobody's telling you what to study, money is not a blocker. What it's telling us is, that's what people want to learn. So I think there is something there, right? Because I think people understand, students understand, this is where the world is heading, and this is where you want to build your skills, which is a good sign. That if, at least if the students want to already learn this, then it might make Aashita's job a little easier to some extent.
You're absolutely right. In all these stakeholders, the ones who try the hardest, the ones who wanted the most, are really the students.
Yeah.
And along with that, it might be helpful to mention the number 5 course amongst, again, the 7 lakh students is English for business communication. So just building communication skills, fundamental skills, still continues to be so important. And I think people understand that.
Yeah. Raghav, somewhere you mentioned about your partnerships with different business schools and colleges internationally as well as in India. You mentioned IIT Roorkee and other colleges. Now, a couple of questions for you here. One is 2 things. One is, Aashita mentioned about the NEP now including preschool kind of thing, and that's where it starts, from year 3 rather than year 5 or year 6. And you're of course in the online education space. Do you see a problem or sociological or a parental issue in terms of introducing young kids to anything online? Will that come in the way of spreading this? And second is, given that you're partnering with large different business schools and other engineering colleges internationally as well as in India, do you see a consolidation happening? I mean, if I'm a small politically kind of thing engineering college which is just about in a shed somewhere in rural Maharashtra, will I go kaput? Because now these courses are, like you said, $1,000 or $5,000 a year. I can get the best of education online. What are your views there?
Yeah, so to your first question, Advait, and I think if I heard you right, you said what role does NEP platforms like Coursera, etc., have to play in terms of introducing young students to the online world? And I have 2 young kids as well.
Will that face a backlash that how soon you want people to get introduced to online?
Yeah, so I think none of us can control that, right? If you have kids, they're already online, right? So irrespective of whether you're an upper class income family or a lower middle class family, kids are already online, right? What I think the role we can play is guide them towards what is the relevant stuff that they should be taking, and balancing time between social media, entertainment, and also education. Again, I get a lot of confidence from the fact that if we provide high quality, engaging education to students, I think students are sharp, they are smart, they will spend their time, they will focus their energies on that. So I think the fact that introducing students, and I'm not an educator who has expertise in the schooling space, so I can't talk to schooling, but I think for higher education, introducing online completely makes sense. We will see a lot of adoption eventually of online degrees as well. The government's already allowed that, and there are going to be Indian institutions who are launching that. I think to your second question around the point about collaborating with Indian institutions, right? So today there are about 170 institutions, top institutions from around the world, who are taking what they are producing on the Coursera to millions of students, including India, around the world. And today, only ISB, IIM Calcutta, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee are the Indian institutions there. And I think it's very important for us to be taking the best of India, firstly to Indian learners, and then secondly to individuals around the world. All of these, programs are changing. So when I did my MBA, and I was fortunate, I went to a top quality institution, but it was a general management program. And today, if I go and do an MBA, which is a general management MBA, I would be making a big mistake, right? Because the general management MBA is dying. Today, MBA students want to do, something which is in digital product management. They want to do something which is in fintech. They want to do something which is in digital transformation, analytics, and so on and so forth. So our attempt with ISB, with IIM Calcutta, is how do you bring management education, which is relevant from today's context, which is relevant for today's India and tomorrow's India. And that's what I think we are working on being able to do.
Okay, okay, interesting. Milind, there's a lot of ask from educational institutions, including higher ed institutions like you, in terms of what they need to do, because there's an entire focus, like I said, shifting from skills to innovation, liberal arts, cross-stream kind of thing. So how, of course, ISB is in a different league altogether, like I was telling Aashita, international schools, ISBs, but for a general kind of even, let's say, college or a business school who's not actually doesn't have that kind of great infrastructure, both physical as well as from a quality of faculty perspective, what would be your recommendations in terms of how do they cope with this? When should they start looking at people like Raghav and sort of actively partner with them without considering people like Raghav as competition for them? Because that's another challenge that one sees, that if students start looking at online, like in the school level, will homeschooling suddenly become the norm, because anyway it's online and I can do kind of thing. So what would be your kind of advice to not so what should I say, colleges that don't have great infrastructure and great quality of faculty, the tier 2, tier 3 kind of people, because that's where the base of the pyramid is.
Yeah, no, that is a hard question, and in fact, I would suspect that students will probably not go to tier 2 and tier 3 colleges if they don't morph into in some way, shape, or form. So either physically, that they're able to upgrade themselves with the kind of faculty and the kind of teaching that they can do, or use technology and maybe tie up with some other institutions where they can get this kind of education going. Because see, the value of that degree, and if the NEP is actually implemented, now here there is this big conditional statement I'm making, that if the implementation of the NEP goes as plans and over the next decade or two, right, you will see that these kinds of institutions will suffer, right? Now their way out is going to be starting to think about technology solutions, and if they can enter the online space where they can augment their capacity with capacities from other institutions, or build courses around that, maybe. But then their role in the space of education is definitely threatened. In fact, the NEP is very clear on even shutting down these affiliate colleges, right, for universities. I mean, they are saying that these university systems, and where all these affiliate colleges are just doing non-multidisciplinary learning, right, they may face a significant challenge. Yeah.
So do you see consolidation happening? And
yes, so I think there will be significant consolidation. In fact, if the NEP allows foreign universities to also operate in India, which they have said that they will allow the top foreign universities, we might even see consolidation happening among some of the good institutions in the country, right? Because they are going to face the kind of competition that they haven't probably faced before, right? And access to education is going to become a lot easier. Now there are haves and have-nots, in the sense that you may not have bandwidth, and those are technological challenges which I'm pretty sure over a period of time are going to go away, right? So institutions that are not geared towards addressing this question, and so this is a game of content, right? I mean, what is it, why do I want to come to your university to learn from your faculty and not get the same kind of education somewhere else? Because if you're going to do the rote learning and the rote teaching, then that is gone. But again, right, I mean, if the NEP is implemented in the way that it's supposed to be, or it states.
You mentioned about foreign universities, Milind. One is government saying, yeah, you're allowed. Do you see that happening actually? May not be immediately tomorrow, but over the next, say, 5 years, 10 years?
So long ago, I think in the 90s, there was a study done by IBM in terms of the amount of money, foreign exchange, that leaves the country for undergrad education, right? And that is in the billions. So over the years, right, universities have tried to come to India, and some of the good universities, at least from the US, I know of a few that are already operating in some way, shape, or form, not necessarily giving degrees. So, the Indian market is huge for education, and there are a lot of people who can afford the kind of education, and they would be perfectly willing to pay, if they were to get that within India itself, right? And the quality if the quality can be maintained. The question is that, what restrictions and barriers the government, and will it make it, possible for them to operate in India in a seamless way, right? And also, will their faculty and their way of operating be reasonably extended? So can their faculty circulate and do this, or will they hire locally and build capacity locally? So those are questions and will they use technology or online media to deliver that kind of education? But
sure.
Yes, I do see a few coming in if it is made a level playing field for them to. Yeah.
Sure. Raghav,
if I may add one quick point to this question as well. I think there will be an element of online degrees that may come into play here also. So on the Coursera platform today, there are 21 online degrees, again from the same universities who teach on Coursera. So University of Pennsylvania, Michigan, University of London, and so on. And these are different from your distance learning degrees, which have a connotation of low quality. Now, interestingly, today on many of these degrees, amongst the highest applicants are coming from India, and especially in master's programs. So I'm somebody who works at a tech company in Bangalore. I'm mid-career, 5 to 10 years into work. I don't want to leave for 2 years to go and do a master's either at an institution in India or overseas. And I, as an individual, come and say, let me do a master's online. Now, given that this is something which has happened over the last 2-3 years, I think many foreign universities may say, should we look at a physical campus, given the challenges of a physical campus in India, or should we just go full out and look at online degrees, and what's the play there? And I think that may be something that we may be a question as well.
And there are evolving models, just to add that there are evolving models where the outside the classroom experience can also be replicated. So while they may do the education part online, but they may contract with different entities to start giving the outside the classroom experience too. So yeah.
Sure. But Raghav, you don't see a quality or a difference in perception that if I do a degree in campus somewhere in a university in US versus doing it online, will my will my potential employers look at it differently? Do you see that?
So there's always been, there's always been that difference so far, Advait. But I think we are going through this period of such rapid change right now that what will higher education look like in 1 year from now, I don't think many of us fully appreciate that. So if it happens that, 4 technology companies say that we've hired X thousand people who did an online degree, the perception of an online degree will change completely very, very quickly. Also, keep in mind that the audience for a standard on-campus degree and an online degree currently are different. So today on the Coursera platform, what we see is students who come to the online degree are many who are coming for masters, lesser for undergrad. And second, many of these are people who work for 5 to 10 years and don't want to leave a job for 2 years to go and get further higher education. So I'm saying 2 things. I'm acknowledging that today the perception is different, but in 1 year, how much it will change, none of us know that. But second, I think the purpose an online degree is serving is it is expanding the number of individuals who come and get a degree compared to what it was earlier.
So you're seeing more and more ex-ed kind of thing happening rather than full-time, people leaving their jobs and taking a post-graduation, more of like executive education happens where you can do both.
Yeah, and these aren't just executive education degrees. These are, what would be a regular master's. It's just that instead of being fully on campus, you're spending 30 hours a week possibly, and you're doing a regular master's program.
Sure.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add, because that's an interesting to see. So in fact, with online and the hybrid learning formats, right, and the flexi formats, right, this whole NEP allows for this credit banking and credit exchange, right? See, you can now you can do that very, I mean, easily, because if you have an audience that is, not necessarily ready to commit a fixed amount of time, but wants to do it over a period of time, mixing online and in class, universities can work that way, and actually people can do a flexi education format, right? And it also, what's also happening in the higher education space is that in order to keep relevance, I mean, some universities are actually tying up with corporates, right? So to build on what was said earlier, was that it's also that corporates say that if you did this course from this university, you're already well trained to kind of come into my organization, and you can hit the ground running. So you're seeing it, especially in the professional education space.
Sure. Aashita, coming to you.
That's actually the point I was trying to make as well, that, the two questions that you asked, one to Milind and one to Raghav, will it be attractive for foreign universities to come to India? In fact, the new 4-year model makes it even more attractive, for them, the fact that there is that shift towards multidisciplinary and not specialization, because that's really how universities are set up overseas. And the fact that, you have that flexible model, 1 year of a diploma, 2 years of an advanced diploma, 3 years gives you a bachelor's, 4 years gives you a master's, makes it really a case for blended learning. It could be, you could have stuff, in classrooms. I mean, they're talking about having the 4th year as a research year. And that's really where, we can come up with creative solutions. You could have 3 years at a university in person, and the 4th year could be, online, especially the research based. In fact, I think, there's a lot of flexibility over there, which is built into the NEP for innovations in, higher ed. And I mean, I know my son did, a course over the summer at Coursera. It was one of those IBM certified courses in, data science. And I have to say, he was, absolutely thrilled with the experience. He was, I think, what we don't realize, what works for a lot of kids is modular learning rather than subject learning. And, in education, we've been talking about this for a long time, even in school education, about, stopping this, thinking about just subjects. But I think if you are really looking at, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, it'll have to be a combination of both, in person and digital.
One, we're running out of time. So one last question to you, Aashita, slightly sensitive topic because of this online education in schools. And, we have gone through this and a lot of complaints also. That
you're not going to ask me about tuition fees.
No. I'm going to ask you about the role of parents, because of this online education. Suddenly now parents are getting a peep into the quality of education the kids are going through. What has been your experience, and do you see that as a big danger for teachers and schools like you? Because suddenly, the kid, the parent is sitting next to, because both parents, even if they are working right now, or many of them are work from home, and they are peeping into, what's happening, and they have their own views in terms of whether the teacher is good, bad, or ugly. What's been your view?
I would have said, don't get me started, but I will answer this question. That's honestly been the hardest part of, I don't even call it online learning. We've changed our narrative at school. From that, we call it learning at home, because now online learning means, so many different things. So the whole learning at home experience, especially for primary kids, has been hard. I think, so for us, according to data protection laws, child safeguarding laws, we have to have an adult in the room till grade 5, and that's true of many schools. So you have your entire audience in your classroom has changed. I mean, just last week we had a father who hollered at the Hindi teacher in Hindi कि आपको पढ़ाना नहीं आता, So we've had a lot of those experiences at the beginning, especially. We've kind of turned it around. We've not looked at it as intrusive, but we've looked at it as a partnership.
Excellent.
We can't help, but parents are partners in this process now, and it's important that they understand what we do. So it's actually worked both ways. Sometimes they realize the challenges that the teachers are going through. I mean, we have teachers who are teaching young kids at home who themselves have young kids at home. They have mother-in-laws at home. It's a combination of things. So
let's not go there now.
No, that's what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is that it's been hard. I think the early days were harder, but we've all found a middle ground and made some peace with it. To any parents on this show, and I think both Milind and Raghav have young kids. I mean, my kids are much older, but okay. But I think okay, all right. So I would say this is really the time to be a partner with your school in this entire process. More than ever.
So no, we are short of time now. So one quick question to all of you. I need an answer in just one word. Starting with you, Aashita, how long do you think, how many years from now till you actually start seeing some tangible impact of the NEP in terms of, for example, in your case, in terms of school education? How many years to go before we see something on the ground?
So, like I said, let's go for the small gains. One is overhauling of the early childhood education system. Second is low stakes board exams. And third is the national curriculum framework. All of them don't take the kind of money and budgets that we think they do. This is stuff that you can get into action quickly. I would say we will see some of these changes in the next 5 years. I'm being optimistic, but I'm an educator. I have to be.
Yes, not an issue. 5 years is still good. Raghav?
Yeah, I'll answer in 2 words, but I'll modify the question a little bit with your permission. So I think as a result of the impact of the NEP plus some of what we're doing at Coursera, I think we will see tangible impact in 2 years in higher education.
Oh, wow. Okay, great. Milind?
15 years.
15 years, wow. Because is it because you are in postgrad and that will take some more time?
No, I want research. I am more focused. I really want Indian institutions to go up the research.
Great. Lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you, all three of you, Raghav, Milind, Aashita, for spending your time, and more importantly, great insights and learnings for all of us in terms of what's in store for us as far as the NEP is concerned. And maybe now I call back Niraj, if you're there, just to do the closing remarks.
Sir, please go ahead and do the closing behalf of NHRDN as well.
Yes, okay, fair enough. So on behalf of Upohan, myself, Eklavya, and National HRD Network, let me thank all three of you for again coming here, making yourself available, sharing your great insights, and thanks all the audience as well. It's been a fantastic experience. I unfortunately got locked out because of sudden heavy rains and thunder shower here, but good to be back, and thanks again all three of you. It was a fantastic experience in terms of what's in store for us. All of us have kids who are in different stages of education, and that will continue. And it's a great learning for all of us. Thanks, Milind. Thanks, Raghav. Thanks, Aashita. And thank you, audience. And our next program is scheduled on 16th of October. It is going to be on a topic called pivoting your careers and pivoting in business. And we'll once again, we'll hopefully have a great panel again next month. Thank you again, and take care. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Advait.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Milind. Thanks, Raghav. Thank you.
Thanks, Raghav. Thanks, Aashita.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.